Chapter 2, Awakening. This current of awareness, fostered by continual effort, grows ever stronger and more constant until finally it leads to self-realization, to sahaja samadhi, the natural state in which pure blissful awareness is constant and uninterrupted, and yet without impeding the normal perceptions and activities of life. It is rare indeed for this consummation to be attained during the life on earth. In the case of Sri Bhagavan, it occurred only a few months later, and with no quest, no striving, no conscious preparation. He himself has described it. It was about 6 weeks before I left Madurai for good that the great change in my life took place. It was quite sudden. I was sitting alone in a room on the first floor of my uncle's house. I seldom had any sickness, and on that day there was nothing wrong with my health, but a sudden violent fear of death overtook me. There was nothing in my state of health to account for it, and I did not try to account for it or to find out whether there was any reason for the fear. I simply felt I am going to die and began thinking what to do about it. It did not occur to me to consult a doctor or my elders or friends. I felt that I had to solve the problem myself, then and there. The shock of the fear of death drove my mind inwards, and I said to myself mentally, without actually framing the words, "Now, death has come. What does it mean? What is it that is dying? This body dies." And I at once dramatized the occurrence of death. I lay with my limbs stretched out stiff as through rigor mortis, and imitated a corpse so as to give greater reality to the inquiry. I held my breath and kept my lips tightly closed so that no sound could escape, so that neither the word I nor any other word could be uttered. Well then, I said to myself, this body is dead. It will be carried stiff to the burning ground, there burnt and reduced to ashes. But with the death of this body, am I dead? Is the body I? It is silent and inert, but I feel the full force of my personality and even the voice of the I within me, apart from it. So that means I am spirit transcending the body. The body dies, but the spirit that transcends it cannot be touched by death. So I am the deathless spirit. All this was not dull thought. It flashed through me vividly as living truth, which I perceived directly, almost without thought process. I was something very real, the only real thing about my present state, and all the conscious activity connected with my body was centered on that I. From that moment onwards, the I, or true self, focused attention on itself by a powerful fascination. Fear of death had vanished once and for all. Absorption in the self continued unbroken from that time on. Other thoughts might come and go, like the various notes of music, but the I continued like the fundamental Shruti note that underlies and blends with all the other notes. whether the body was engaged in talking, reading, or anything else, I was still centered on I. Previous to that crisis, I had no clear perception of myself and was not consciously attracted to it. I felt no perceptible or direct interest in it, much less any inclination to dwell permanently in it. Thus simply described, without pretension or verbiage, the state attained might seem no different from egotism, but that is due only to the ambiguity in the words I and self. The difference is brought out by the attitude towards death. For one whose interest is centered in the ego, the I, as a separate individual being, has a dread of death, which threatens the dissolution of the ego. Whereas here, the fear of death had vanished forever in the realization that the I was one with the universal deathless self, which is the spirit and the self of every man. Even to say that he knew he was one with the spirit is inadequate, since it suggests a separate I who knew this, whereas the I in him was itself consciously the spirit. Years later, the difference was expounded by Sri Bhagavan to Paul Brunton, a Western seeker. In the dialogue, Brunton asked, "What exactly is this self of which you speak? If what you say is true, there must be another self in man. Can a man be possessed of two identities, two selves? To understand this manner, it is first necessary for a man to analyze himself, because it has long been his habit to think as others think. He has never faced his I in the true manner. He has not a correct picture of himself. He has too long identified himself with the body and the brain. Therefore, I tell you to pursue this inquiry, who am I? You ask me to describe this true self to you. What can be said? It is that out of which the sense of the personal I arises, and into which it will have to disappear. Disappear? How can one lose the feeling of one's personality? The first and foremost of all thoughts, the primeval thought in the mind of every man, is the thought I. It is only after the birth of this thought that any other thoughts can arise at all. It is only after the first personal pronoun I has arisen in the mind that the second personal pronoun you can make its appearance. If you could mentally follow the I thread until it led you back to its source, you would discover that, just as it is the first thought to appear, so it is the last to disappear. This is a matter which can be directly experienced. You mean that it is possible to conduct such a mental investigation into oneself? Certainly. It is possible to go inwards until the last thought, I, gradually vanishes. What is then left? Will a man then become quite unconscious, or will he become an idiot? No. On the contrary, he will attain that consciousness which is immortal, and he will become truly wise when he has awakened to his true self, which is the real nature of man. But surely the sense of I must also pertain to that. The sense of I pertains to the person, the body and brain. When a man knows his true self for the first time, something else arises from the depths of his being and takes possession of him. That something is behind the mind. It is infinite, divine, eternal. Some people call it the kingdom of heaven. Others call it the soul, and still others name it nirvana, and the Hindus call it mukti, or liberation. You may give it what name you wish. When this happens, a man has not really lost himself. Rather, he has found himself. Unless and until a man embarks on this quest of the true self, doubt and uncertainty will follow his footsteps through life. The greatest kings and statesmen try to rule others when in their heart of hearts they know that they cannot rule themselves. Yet the greatest power is at the command of the man who has penetrated to his inmost depth. What is the use of knowing about everything else when you do not yet know who you are? Men avoid this inquiry into the true self. But what else is there so worthy to be undertaken?